Just moments ago, Sarah broke free from the nightmare of her past life, where she had died a miserable and agonizing death from illness. She had been precisely reborn on the very day that would change her destiny forever. It was the day the military base finalized the registration for the annual family housing allocation. It was also the beginning of the end, the day when the entire Smith family would tear off their masks, conspire to drain everything she had worked for, and steal her only source of security. On this exact day in her previous life, she had been cowardly and timid. Desperate to keep the peace for the sake of a happy home, she had allowed her in-laws to manipulate her and her husband to deceive her. In the end, the housing allocation she had earned after enduring 3 grueling years as a military spouse was quietly transferred by her husband, James, to his hometown childhood sweetheart, Emily. Left with absolutely nothing, Sarah had exhausted half her life, only to pass away alone and plagued by illness. In this life, no one knew she had been reborn. Hey guys, ever burned yourself out to keep the peace, only to get taken advantage of? Today's story is the ultimate comeback. Watch how one woman uses cold logic and strict boundaries to outsmart toxic family gaslighting. Let's dive in. Their calculating schemes were still hidden beneath gentle facades, but this time, she would never again let herself be slaughtered like a lamb. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah. What's taking you so long to open the door? Outside was the loud, piercingly shrill voice of her mother-in-law, Martha, exactly as she remembered it. Suppressing the coldness surging from the depths of her heart, Sarah raised a hand to smooth out her clean, simple floral blouse. With steady steps, she walked over to open the door. As soon as the door swung open, Martha stood there with her hands on her hips, her face wearing a look of entitled bitterness. Behind her stood her silent father-in-law, Arthur. Ever since Sarah had moved to the military base to be with her husband, the old couple had lived in their rural hometown year-round. They refused to work or earn a living, waiting like clockwork every month for the living expenses Sarah and James sent back. More accurately, they were waiting for the money she sent back. James kept most of his salary to himself, occasionally using it to help out his childhood friend, Emily. The expenses for supporting her in-laws, social obligations, and daily necessities for 3 whole years, every single cent had been scraped together through Sarah's extreme frugality. As a military spouse living in the base's family compound, she didn't have a formal job. She relied on mending clothes for other military families and doing odd jobs, carefully budgeting and saving every spare dime, only to give every last penny to support the Smith elders. In her past life, she had believed this was simply her duty as a daughter-in-law. In return, they had taken a mile when given an inch, repaying her kindness with cruel betrayal. Why are you just standing there? Hurry up and get the money. Martha unceremoniously pushed her way through the door, walking into the house with familiar ease as her eyes shamelessly scanned Sarah's drawers. It's time to send this month's living expenses. James said today is the day they finalize the housing allocations. Our expenses at home are high right now, so add an extra $20. I need to buy your father-in-law some autumn clothes when we get back. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, coldly watching the older woman's practiced, demanding posture. On this day, in years past, she had been busy trying to please her in-laws, terrified they would speak ill of her to James, and terrified it would jeopardize her chance at getting the housing allocation. No matter how much they asked for, she would always grit her teeth and agree. It was exactly this concession that convinced them she was weak and easily bullied, making them feel that all her sacrifices were simply what she owed them. In the end, they had felt perfectly justified in conspiring with James to steal her house. This time, however, her tone was calm, without an ounce of surrender. Starting this month, I won't be sending any more living expenses back home. As soon as the words left her mouth, the room fell dead silent. The entitled look on Martha's face suddenly froze. As if she had misheard, she narrowed her eyes and scrutinized her. What did you just say? Sarah, say that one more time. Off to the side, Arthur also raised his head, a flash of surprise in his cloudy eyes. He still didn't speak, using only his silence to exert pressure, his usual tactic. Arthur hid in the background, silently indulging his wife as she made a scene. Sarah raised her eyes, her gaze open and unwavering. Every word she spoke was crystal clear. I said, starting this month, I am stopping all living expense payments for the 2 of you. From now on, I am no longer responsible for your living costs. This isn't a discussion, it's a notification. Martha froze for 2 seconds before instantly blowing up. Raising her voice, she skillfully launched into her usual routine of moral guilt-tripping. Are you crazy? You married into the Smith family, so you are a Smith daughter-in-law. It is perfectly justified and expected for you to support your parents-in-law. If you don't give us money, do you expect us old folks to live on thin air? Sarah, has your conscience been eaten by dogs? I've been married into the Smith family for 3 years, and I've lived on the military base for 3 years, Sarah replied slowly, unhurried and unbothered. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word carried weight. For 3 years, I've sent money on time every single month. During holidays and festivals, I've provided extra money for your medicine and clothes. I have never once missed a payment for the family's social obligations and gifts. Sarah raised a hand and pointed out the window toward the family compound. Living here on the base, my life is no easier than it is back home. I don't have a fixed salary. Every cent is hard-earned money, from staying up late doing odd jobs. For 3 years, I have fulfilled all my duties. I owe you absolutely nothing. What do you mean, you owe us nothing? Martha waved her hand unreasonably, her face flushing bright red. Our son is a military officer, so his parents should be supported by him. You are his wife, so you have to shoulder this for him. Cutting off our money now, are you trying to drive us to our graves? I see you've gotten too big for your britches. You're taking advantage of James not being home to deliberately bully us old folks. Sarah was all too familiar with this rhetoric. Over the past 3 years, whenever she showed the slightest resistance, Martha would use filial piety to pressure her, hijacking James's reputation, to force her into compromising and giving in time and time again. In her past life, Sarah had been terrified of being called unfilial, afraid of causing trouble for James, afraid of ruining his prospects, and even more afraid of jeopardizing the housing allocation she had worked so hard to finally qualify for. But now, she understood perfectly clear. What truly threatened the allocation and destroyed her life had never been her own toughness, but rather the greed and betrayal of their entire family. I am not bullying you, Sarah retorted calmly, her logic clear. James is your son. He should be the main one supporting you. For the past 3 years, he has kept his salary to himself. I have never seen a single cent of it go toward his parents' retirement. It has always been me, the daughter-in-law, picking up the slack. I have done everything humanly possible for this family. Furthermore, she continued, staring right into Martha's stunned face, the rules for finalizing the housing allocations today are very clear. They prioritize the personal conduct, lifestyle, and family stability of the military spouses. I have always been faultless, diligent, and well-behaved all year round. In contrast, you two come to my door, causing a scene and making endless demands every single time. If word gets out, it will damage James's reputation and ruin our family's important business. I'm stopping the living expenses for the sake of the family's stability, to prevent people from gossiping. These words were well-reasoned and hit the nail right on the head. Martha was instantly left speechless. She opened her mouth but couldn't find a single word to say for a long time. She could throw tantrums and play the victim, but what she feared most was affecting James's future. James was now a company commander in the military with a bright future ahead of him. He was the pride of the Smith family and their entire village. The old couple pinned all their lifelong hopes on this son and didn't dare to hinder his career in the slightest. Arthur finally couldn't hold back anymore and spoke up, his voice hoarse. Sarah, that's not how you should talk. How can a family calculate things so clearly? We are all one family. It's only right that we help each other out. Making a fuss like this, how can James focus on his work out there? Sarah looked at him and calmly asked in return, Dad, is calculating things clearly considered making a fuss? Then, was it simply expected for me to bear all the expenses by myself for 3 years with no help from anyone? Arthur was instantly left speechless. He lowered his head and didn't dare utter another word. Martha recovered her wits. Still unwilling to give up, though not daring to throw a loud tantrum anymore, she switched to a tone of grievance, playing the victim. It's not like we have to have your money. It's just that things are tight at home after the autumn harvest, and we figured that since your living conditions are better, you could help us out a bit. What's wrong with that? How did you get so heartless, child? It's not about being heartless. It's about keeping duty as duty, Sarah replied, her attitude firm without the slightest wavering. I have fulfilled the obligations I was supposed to fulfill. I can't afford to fill any extra bottomless pits, nor will I fill them anymore. Sarah knew clearly in her heart that this was only the first step. Cutting off the living expenses was merely severing their blood-sucking source, but it was far from enough. As long as the two elders were still in their hometown, they would constantly whisper in James's ear, twisting the truth every day. They would call her unfilial and say she was willful, subtly influencing James's judgment and cooperating with his scheme to secretly switch the housing allocation. This was exactly how it played out in her past life. The excuse James ultimately used to convince himself was that she had a bad personality, didn't understand filial piety, and couldn't tolerate her in-laws. Therefore, he claimed he had no choice but to give the allocation to Emily, who was gentle, sensible, and knew how to be considerate of him. She would absolutely never give them the opportunity to smear her name again. Seeing that playing soft wasn't working, Martha started suppressing her anger and speaking in a passive-aggressive tone. Fine, you're the tough one. Us two old folks just won't spend your money, okay? I'd like to see if you can successfully get that house allocated to you today. Just wait until James gets back. I'll have him teach you some manners. Sarah's eyes grew slightly cold. Wait until James gets back? Him coming back was exactly what she was waiting for. But she wouldn't be flustered and tearfully defending herself like in her past life. She would firmly grasp all the initiative. She spoke calmly. You don't need to wait for him to come back. If you want to see him, you don't have to wait to tattle on me. I'll take you to see him right now. Martha was taken aback. What did you say? Go to the military base? Sarah nodded, her tone certain. Since you two can't sit still and always worry about trivial matters at home, causing conflicts, it's better if you just move to the military base. For one, you can personally keep James company and take care of his daily needs. For another, living in the military family compound means following the rules and living a steady, peaceful life. You'll never have to worry or bicker over living expenses again. As soon as these words were spoken, the expressions on Martha and Arthur's faces changed simultaneously. They wanted to go to the base to enjoy the perks, but what they feared most was living there long-term. Country folks were used to being unrestrained and free of strict rules. They were accustomed to throwing tantrums and acting shamelessly at home, but they knew very well that the military had strict discipline. Every word and action would be watched by others, leaving absolutely no room for them to act out. If they went to the base, they wouldn't be able to cause trouble as they pleased, extort money as they pleased, or spread gossip as they pleased. Every move they made would have to abide by the rules, leaving them with no freedom whatsoever. Martha immediately waved her hands. We're not going. The military base has too many rules. We country folks aren't used to living there. We're perfectly fine staying in our hometown. Places with more rules are more stable, Sarah said, refusing to yield an inch. Her tone was flat but carried an irresistible toughness. With you at home, I always have to worry about filial piety and my reputation, which inevitably leads to arguments and bickering. If you go to the military base to live by James's side, your son can support you personally. It is perfectly justified, and no one can find the slightest fault in it. It will also save outsiders from saying that I, the daughter-in-law, am unfilial. So it's settled. Sarah didn't give them any room to argue. She turned around, walked into the inner room, and started packing the luggage they had brought. The two elders had originally come this time specifically to demand money and to snoop around for news about the housing allocation, so they had only brought simple bedding and bags. Her movements were swift, folding the quilts and tying up the bags. Every action was crisp and decisive, without a trace of hesitation. Martha panicked. She hurried forward and grabbed Sarah's arm. Sarah, don't mess around. We aren't going. We really aren't going. Stop it right now. Sarah gently shook off her hand, her eyes completely calm. Mom, Dad, I'm doing this for the good of the Smith family, and for James's future. Just go to the base with peace of mind. All problems will naturally be resolved once you get there. Looking at her resolute demeanor, Arthur finally realized that today's Sarah was completely different from the weak, easily manipulated daughter-in-law she used to be. She was no longer backing down, no longer soft-hearted, and would no longer be emotionally blackmailed by filial piety. Every word she spoke was solidly reasoned, leaving them absolutely unable to find a single flaw. Sarah finished packing the luggage. She carried the bags to the door and looked back at the two elders, whose faces were a mix of pale and green. Let's go. The bus leaves in 2 hours, which is just in time to make today's base pass registration. Martha stood frozen, both furious and panicked, yet she absolutely didn't dare to throw a tantrum again. She knew clearly that if she made a scene and it reached the ears of the military leadership, it would damage James's reputation. Ultimately, it would be the Smith family who suffered the loss. Sarah coldly watched their panicked and helpless state, not feeling the slightest ripple of emotion in her heart. Carrying her in-laws' luggage, Sarah walked ahead, her steps steady and free of hesitation. Behind her, Martha was still relentlessly nagging. Her tone had shifted from throwing a tantrum to a grinding, pestering persistence, trying to wear Sarah down and make her give in through sheer annoyance. Arthur remained silent the entire time, following closely step by step, calculation hiding in his eyes. He could tell that Sarah's attitude was unyielding today and that forcing a fight wouldn't do any good. So, he planned to humor her and go to the base first. Once they saw their son, they could whisper in his ear, let James deal with her, and force her to cough up the money to support them again. Sarah saw right through their petty schemes. It had been exactly like this in her previous life. Whenever her in-laws couldn't take advantage of her, they would immediately run to the military base to complain to James. They would twist the truth, calling her rebellious, unfilial, and harsh. They always managed to coax James into giving her the cold shoulder every time he came home, scolding her for being unreasonable and failing to see the big picture. In this life, however, she was going to grant their wish and send them straight to the base. But it wasn't to let them stir up trouble. It was to trap them within the military's strict rules, thoroughly stripping them of their ability to make waves. "Sarah, why are you being so stubborn, child?" Martha quickened her pace to catch up, wearing a look of earnest persuasion, pretending to be considerate of Sarah. "We are doing perfectly fine in the country. We don't want to go to the base and cause trouble. If you send us over there, outsiders will think you despise us and are deliberately tossing us to James to manage. If word gets out, you're the one whose reputation will suffer." Sarah didn't even turn her head, her tone flat. "A good reputation doesn't come from what people say, but from what they do. I provided for you every month for 3 years, and no one appreciated it. Now, my actions are still entirely above board. There is nothing shameful about the way I conduct myself. You're just impossible to reason with." Rendered speechless by Sarah's retort, Martha ground her teeth in anger. The walk from the family compound to the town's bus stop wasn't far. Along the way, they ran into several familiar military wives and family members. Everyone was a neighbor who had lived in the same compound all year round, seeing each other day in and day out. Seeing Sarah carrying the Smith elders' luggage, they all looked over sideways with curiosity. Martha instantly put on a pitiful, aggrieved expression. She deliberately slowed her pace, her brows drooping, and spoke in a voice that was neither too loud nor too soft, just loud enough for passers-by to hear. "Oh, it's a sin. We raised a son to become a military officer, but now our daughter-in-law despises us 2 useless old folks and is driving us to the base to suffer." She was an expert at this routine of playing the victim to garner sympathy. In her past life, Sarah had feared this the most, terrified of the neighbors' gossip and terrified of getting a reputation as an evil daughter-in-law. Every time, she would hastily compromise and placate her in-laws. But today, Sarah was completely unaffected. She even turned to look at the onlooking wives and spoke openly. "Ladies, don't overthink it. My parents-in-law can't sit idle at home and always miss my husband. It just so happens that the military is finalizing the housing allocations today, so I'm sending the 2 elders over to live with him for a while. They can personally accompany their son and show their love as parents." With just one sentence, she completely blocked Martha's path to playing the victim. Hearing this, the crowd instantly understood and chimed in with smiles. "So they're going to see their son, that's wonderful. James works so hard, it's very thoughtful for his parents to go over and take care of him." Yes, Sarah is so sensible and thoughtful. The grievance on Martha's face froze. Her act had been exposed, and her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She didn't dare to cry and complain indiscriminately anymore. Arthur glared at her fiercely, signaling her to behave and stop making a fool of herself. Sarah watched coldly from the sidelines, feeling no ripples of emotion in her heart. Dealing with elders who loved to stir up trouble and flaunt their seniority, reasoning was useless. Clashing head-on would only leave room for gossip. The best method was to seize the moral high ground, using rules and decency to completely seal off their paths. Upon arriving at the bus stop, Sarah placed the luggage on the side of the road and took out 2 pre-prepared bus tickets. When she had woken up Reborn early this morning, she had anticipated this step and bought the tickets in advance to eliminate any variables. Looking at the tickets, Martha completely panicked and entirely dropped her disguise. She said anxiously, "I'm not going. Sarah, you go return those tickets. We absolutely refuse to go to the base." "The tickets cannot be returned," Sarah said flatly. "The bus tickets to the military base are issued under real names. Once sold, they cannot be returned or exchanged. Wasting them would be a loss of government resources, which is unnecessary." "Then I won't go. I'll just squat right here." Martha plopped right down on a stone by the roadside, acting completely shameless. "You want to send me there, but I simply won't go. Let's see what you can do about it." Arthur also stopped in his tracks and said in a deep voice, "Sarah, enough is enough. We are your elders. Pressing us like this is going too far." Here it was again the same old rhetoric of using their status as elders to pressure people. Sarah lowered her eyes slightly, and when she looked up, her gaze was completely clear without a trace of panic. "Dad, I have never forced you to. Military families care most about rules and decency. You 2 stay at home, asking for money every month, and the moment things don't go your way, you come to our door, causing a scene. The neighbors in the family compound see it all. Today is a critical period for the housing allocation. The military strictly inspects the conduct of family members and the family atmosphere. If someone reports that a soldier's family members are frequently causing trouble and making endless demands, it won't just affect James's performance evaluations. It will directly lead to the cancellation of his housing allocation qualification." Her words were crystal clear, striking straight at the heart of the matter. I am sending you two to the base, firstly, to let you stay close to your son, so you can be provided for without worry, and secondly, to avoid suspicion. It will silence everyone's gossip, protect James's future, and secure our family's housing allocation. I am looking out for this family, not trying to make things difficult for you. As soon as these words were spoken, Arthur's expression changed drastically. What he valued most in his entire life was his son's future and the Smith family's reputation. The housing allocation was a wonderful thing their whole family had been looking forward to for years. They absolutely could not tolerate the slightest mistake. Martha's body, which had been right in the middle of a tantrum, also instantly froze. She subconsciously stood up, her tone panicked. Will it really affect the housing allocation and affect James's evaluations? The rules in the military have always been like this. Sarah stated with certainty, without a trace of exaggeration. The housing allocation for military families doesn't just look at the soldier's seniority, they also review the family atmosphere and the family member's reputation. If there are frequent conflicts and gossip among neighbors, the qualification will be temporarily suspended or even canceled. This was not a lie she had fabricated. It was the actual, solid military housing policy in 1989. In her previous life, in order to whitewash his maneuver of switching the allocation, James had used her arguments and conflicts with her in-laws as an excuse. He reported to his superiors that her family was discordant and had a poor atmosphere, thereby rationalizing his action of replacing her allocation. In this life, she was a step ahead, using the rules to lock them down completely. Arthur instantly became serious. He immediately pulled at Martha, who still wanted to act shamelessly, and scolded her in a low voice. "Stop making a fuss. Sarah is right. We cannot delay James's important matters. If we have to go to the base, then we go to the base." Martha felt both afraid and unwilling in her heart, but she didn't dare throw a tantrum or act shamelessly anymore. No matter how greedy and unreasonable she was, she didn't dare to joke around with her son's career as a military officer and the hard-won housing allocation. The bus slowly approached and pulled over by the side of the road. Sarah picked up the luggage and was the first to board. She looked back at the two elders standing there in a daze. "Get on. Once we reach the base, everything will be arranged." Forced by the pressure, the two could only sullenly follow her onto the bus. They remained silent the whole way, their faces terrifyingly gloomy. The bus bumped along the road, heading toward the military base in the suburbs. Along the way, Sarah's mind raced, sorting through all the timelines and suspicious details. Today was the 17th of September 1989. It was the last day for the military's logistics department to calculate and verify the housing allocation quotas for accompanying families. All military families who had accompanied the Army for 3 full years, had no disciplinary violations, and had no major family conflicts, were eligible to apply for a complete apartment in the family compound. Sarah had been an accompanying spouse for exactly 3 years and 2 months. Her qualifications fully met the standard, making her the first-in-line candidate for this housing allocation. On the other hand, James's childhood sweetheart, Emily, had just moved from the countryside to the city this year. She had no seniority as an accompanying spouse and no family registration on file. She had absolutely no qualification for the housing allocation. In her past life, James had used his liaison clearance as a company commander to secretly tamper with the quota registration information. Under the pretext that his family members were causing trouble, the family atmosphere was poor, and they were unsuitable for housing, he revoked Sarah's quota. Then, using their shared hometown connections, he attached the quota to the name of Emily, who was acting as a temporary accompanying dependent. Her in-laws had known the entire time. They even actively cooperated with him to smear her name, spreading rumors to outsiders that she was unfilial and domineering, making James's manipulation look completely reasonable and justified. In this life, by sending her in-laws away in advance, she was cutting off the source of their smearing. Without her in-laws causing trouble and spreading rumors in the rear, James would have no excuse to smear her. The very first step of his plan to steal the quota would completely fall through. The bus arrived at the gate of the military base. The sentries standing guard had a straight posture, strictly enforcing the registration and inspection system. Sarah familiarly took out her ID card and her military dependent pass to cooperate with the registration. After the sentry verified the information, he politely let them pass. "Please come in, ma'am. Company Commander James is on duty at the headquarters building today." "Thank you." Sarah nodded in response. Behind her, Martha and Arthur looked at the solemn, orderly military camp. The stern sentries instantly made them feel constrained. All of their unreasonableness and aggressive attitudes vanished, and even their walking became cautious. There was no room for country-style tantrums here, nor any neighborhood gossip to exploit. The strict military discipline pressed down on them, making it hard to breathe. This was exactly the effect Sarah wanted. Carrying their luggage, she led the two elders straight to the temporary dormitory area for the families of military cadres. The military had a regulation that visiting family members could stay in these collective temporary dormitories. It didn't take up an official housing allocation and made centralized management much easier. Sarah placed their bags at the door of the dormitory and turned to look at the two stiff-faced elders, her tone peaceful. This is the military's temporary family dormitory. It's clean, orderly, and has dedicated staff for cleaning and management. Water and electricity are completely free, and your food and lodging are secure. From now on, you will stay here temporarily. James comes over every day after work. If you want to see him or talk to him, you can do so anytime. Martha looked at the tidy dormitory, bottling up her anger but not daring to lash out. She could only bite the bullet and say, "Fine, we'll stay here. But I am definitely going to ask James how exactly he teaches his wife to bully her elders like this." "Go ahead, Funi." Sarah agreed openly and calmly. "Feel free to tell him everything and make it all clear. Today just happens to be the final day for the housing allocation count, so let him come back and properly sort out our family matters, lest outsiders start gossiping." The more open and composed Sarah was, the more uncertain the two elders felt. They had originally thought she would be terrified of them, complaining and afraid of James reprimanding her. However, she was completely transparent and upright the entire time, having reason and rules entirely on her side. Instead, they were left at a loss as to how to make things difficult for her. Arthur frowned and said in a deep voice, "Sarah, it's fine for us to stay here, but isn't what you said earlier about cutting off our living expenses going too far? James has a high salary. Your family should be the ones bearing our expenses. You can't just keep shirking your responsibilities." "I am not shirking anything," Sarah said, looking him right in the eye, her logic perfectly clear. "For the 3 years I've been with the military, I've borne all the household expenses, social obligations, and your daily costs. James kept his entire salary for himself. What I am stopping is the extra bottomless pit of subsidies. I haven't shirked a single cent of the basic support I am obligated to provide. Now that you're living on the base, your food and housing are taken care of, and you have no need for extra expenses, so naturally, you don't need living expenses. Whenever you decide to return to our hometown to live peacefully and stop making baseless demands, we will fulfill our support obligations according to the rules. It is perfectly fair and reasonable." Her words were watertight, fully backed by reason and the rules. Arthur was left completely speechless, only able to silently swallow his anger. Sarah didn't want to entangle with them any longer. Saying more was useless and would only waste her breath. She raised her hand and checked the time. It was already early afternoon. There were still a few hours before the final housing allocation list was officially posted and filed in the evening. At this moment, James was on duty in the headquarters building, which was precisely the most convenient time for him to manipulate things behind the scenes and alter the registered names. Her first step in cutting her losses was complete, cutting off their financial supply, locking down her in-laws, and completely sealing off any rumors from the rear. Next came facing James's schemes head-on, figuring out his entire operation, setting up defenses in advance, and protecting her housing allocation quota. She spoke flatly to the two elders. "Rest easy and wait here for James. I'm going back to the family compound first to verify the housing allocation documents. I will see you at the public announcement this evening." After saying this, she turned and left, her steps firm, without the slightest backward glance. From behind her came Martha's suppressed complaints, but the older woman no longer had the confidence to throw a tantrum and cause a scene. Leaving the temporary family dormitory area, Sarah suppressed all the restlessness in her heart and walked straight toward the logistics headquarters building. The entire military camp was orderly, with soldiers walking hurriedly back and forth. No one noticed the thoughts of this ordinary military wife, who had already been plotting her every step. Sending her in-laws away and cutting off their financial support had merely snuffed out the hidden danger of a fire in her own backyard. The person who truly wanted to drain her completely and steal her 3 years of seniority as a military dependent had always been hiding beneath a peaceful facade her husband, James, whom she lived with day and night. In her past life, she hadn't been able to believe it until the very end. She couldn't believe that her respectable and upright military husband, who always seemed so gentle and considerate to her, could be selfish to such a degree. He knew exactly how much she had suffered during her 3 years on the base. He knew how she had skimped and saved for the family's welfare, ruining her health in the process, yet he still didn't hesitate to take her only shelter and hand it over to the person he held dear in his heart. In this life, she felt no inferiority and no resentment, only a calm confrontation and calculated planning remained. There were only 3 hours left until the final housing allocation list was entered into the system, stamped, and filed. Right now, James was on duty at the logistics building, enjoying the convenience of handling the family housing documents. It was the easiest time for him to tamper with the records. Sarah didn't rush in blindly to confront him. Having been reborn, she understood all too well that impulsiveness was the most useless thing. Accusations without evidence would only earn her the labels of being crazy, jealous, and unreasonable. It would play right into James's hands, giving him the perfect leverage to smear her reputation. She slowed her pace, sorting through all the subtle, abnormal details in her mind. Starting about half a month ago, James had become unusually strange. In the past, he was busy with training and duty. When he came home, he didn't say much but was grounded and dutiful. Lately, however, he was constantly coming home late, acting suspiciously, and hiding his letters. Whenever she got close, he would subconsciously cover the notes and letters on his desk. Not only that, but he had repeatedly dropped hints, urging her to voluntarily give up her quota for this housing allocation. Her mind made up, Sarah changed direction and headed back to her small house in the family compound first. The house wasn't large, and the furnishings were simply a table, a bed, and a cabinet. It was a home she had built little by little over her 3 years accompanying the army. When she walked over to the old wooden cabinet and opened the bottom drawer, her military-dependent files were neatly arranged inside. The annual family evaluation forms, the daily attendance records every receipt, and every certificate had been properly preserved. This was the ironclad proof that she had followed the rules, dutifully stayed in her lane, and met all the qualifications for the housing allocation. She verified all the documents one by one, organized them neatly, carefully placed them into a craft paper envelope, and tucked it safely against her body. After confirming everything was correct, she opened the hidden compartment on the side of the cabinet. Inside lay several receipts she had deliberately kept. They were the postal return receipts for the living expenses she had sent to her in-laws over the past 6 months. The date, the amount, and the payee's name were clear and explicit on every single slip. This was the proof that she had fulfilled her obligations to support them, a weapon that would completely shatter all of the Smith family's future excuses to smear her as unfilial and neglectful of the elderly. Having gathered all the evidence, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, quietly reviewing James's entire scheme. He was very smart and extremely selfish. He never left any obvious flaws in his actions. The military housing allocation process in 1989 was rigorous, but there was one loophole that could be exploited. An officer could submit a statement of family circumstances, allowing the logistics department to review and subtly adjust the priority of the housing quotas. In her past life, James had used this very loophole to submit a false statement. He lied, claiming that Sarah was constantly at odds with her in-laws, that their family experienced frequent conflicts, and that her conduct was unstable. Stating she did not meet the standard of a stable military dependent for housing allocation, he applied to revoke her quota. At the same time, under the pretext that a fellow townswoman's family was facing difficulties and lacked a fixed residence, he quietly registered a quota for Emily. Taking advantage of his position's convenience in handling documents, he secretly completed the quota replacement under the table. Her in-laws had cooperated throughout the entire process, spreading bad things about her everywhere in their hometown. They were just waiting to solidify her bad reputation, making James's manipulation look perfectly reasonable and entirely selfless. In her past life, Sarah had been ignorant and naive, kept in the dark the entire time. It wasn't until the list was publicly announced and her house was occupied that she completely broke down. In this life, she had sent her in-laws away in advance, trapping them within the military's strict rules so they couldn't spread rumors on the outside. This directly dismantled James's core argument for smearing her name. But she knew clearly that he wouldn't just stop here. Once greed takes root, it only intensifies. Sure enough, before she could even step out the door, the sound of familiar footsteps came from outside. Steady and methodical, it was James coming back. Sarah instantly withdrew all the coldness from her eyes, reverting to her usual calm and indifferent appearance without showing a single flaw. The door was gently pushed open. James walked in wearing a neat uniform, his posture tall and straight, his features handsome. To outsiders, he was absolutely an outstanding military officer and a reliable husband. Only she knew what a cold and selfish heart hid beneath this upright facade. Upon entering, he first scanned the room. Not seeing his parents, a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. He then looked at her, his tone gentle, and carrying his usual comforting manner. "Sarah, where are Mom and Dad?" "I just went to the temporary dormitory and didn't see anyone." Sarah raised her eyes, her tone flat and waveless. "I sent Mom and Dad to the temporary dormitory to settle in. I figured you were busy on duty today, so you wouldn't have to be distracted running back and forth. With Mom and Dad staying in the camp, they're close to you, making it convenient for you to look after them. James was slightly startled, clearly not expecting her to be so reasonable and understanding. In the past, when her in-laws came to make a fuss, she would only endure it with silent grievance. She would never proactively arrange for them to stay temporarily at the base. After his brief surprise, he immediately returned to normal. He sat down naturally, his tone carrying a deliberate gentleness. You've worked hard. Mom and Dad are old and stubborn in their thinking. If they offended you in any way, please bear with them. It was this hypocritical rhetoric again, always asking her to bear with it, always asking her to be tolerant. No one had ever asked if she was tired or if she felt wronged. Sarah sneered in her heart, but her face showed no emotion. We're all one family. There's no need to talk about bearing with it or not. It's just that Mom and Dad stay at home all year round, where there's a lot of idle gossip, which easily breeds misunderstandings. Having them live at the base and follow the rules is a good thing for your future and for our family's housing allocation. James's eyes shifted slightly, seemingly not expecting her to consider things so thoroughly. He fell silent for 2 seconds before changing the subject, finally revealing his true purpose and cutting straight to the core topic. Sarah, about this housing allocation, I need to discuss something with you. She lowered her eyes, her fingertips gently stroking the craft paper envelope, her tone soft. Go ahead, Sarah said. James looked at her, his tone carrying a deliberate sense of difficulty and earnestness, looking as though he was thinking solely of the family. Housing quotas are tight this time. There are many veteran, non-commissioned officers and old company commanders waiting in line. We haven't been with the military for that long. We're young and can still wait. How about we give up our quota this time? When we have more seniority next year or the year after, the house we get will have better conditions and be more secure. What do you think? Here it was the exact same rhetoric as in her past life. In her previous life, Sarah had been moved by his empty promises, thinking her husband was ambitious, steady, and thinking long-term, so she had foolishly nodded and agreed. Only in the end did she discover that he wasn't asking her to wait. He had never intended to leave the house for her at all. The giving it up he spoke of meant giving it to Emily. Sarah raised her eyes and looked straight into his, her tone calm and her logic clear. She didn't yell or make a scene, but every word pierced the heart. James, we've been with the military for 3 years and 2 months. We are qualified candidates in line for this housing allocation. For the past 3 years, I've kept to myself and done my duty. I have no disciplinary violations and no major family conflicts. Our qualifications meet all the requirements. Why should others get an allocation while we have to give ours up? James clearly hadn't expected her to directly contradict him. In the past, she had always obeyed his every word and never argued against any of his decisions. A flash of shock appeared in his eyes. He then frowned, his tone carrying a bit more pressure. Isn't this for the sake of playing it safe? The social dynamics in the military are complicated. We are young, so we shouldn't fight over short-term gains. There's no need to offend the older comrades over a house and affect my future promotions. Fight over short-term gains? Sarah asked softly in return. We've kept to ourselves and endured for 3 years. Using our own seniority to get the benefits we deserve, how is that fighting over short-term gains? How would earnestly fighting for our legitimate rights affect your promotion? The barrage of questions instantly left James speechless. He hadn't expected the usually docile Sarah to be so articulate today, with every word backed by reason, leaving him unable to argue. After a moment of stalemate, he could only put away his hypocritical gentleness, his tone carrying a veiled hardness. Sarah, I am the head of this household. You can't go wrong listening to me. We are giving up the quota this time. I promise we will definitely get priority next time. And if I don't give it up? Sarah raised her eyes, her gaze clear and open. James's face darkened slightly, his tone carrying a trace of imperceptible coldness. Sarah, why are you being so unreasonable? It's just a house. There's no need to be so petty and calculating. Military families value the big picture above all else. The big picture again. The so-called big picture had always meant her making sacrifices, backing down, and compromising to accommodate his selfishness and his beloved childhood sweetheart. Sarah had completely figured out his bottom line and calculations. First, he would coax her into voluntarily giving up her rights, saving him the trouble of manipulating things behind the scenes. If she refused, he would immediately launch his backup plan, fabricating negative reports about her to forcibly replace the quota. She didn't expose him right away. She merely said flatly, I am not being petty and calculating. I just want what I rightly deserve. In my 3 years here, I haven't enjoyed any luxuries. I just want a stable place to live. That isn't too much to ask. Seeing her resolute attitude and refusal to back down, the warmth in James's eyes completely faded, and his tone grew colder. If you insist on being this stubborn, did Mom and Dad make a fuss with you again earlier? Are you angry and deliberately taking it out on me? He habitually shifted the blame, attributing her reasonable demands to her acting out of spite against her in-laws and being petty. Sarah shook her head, her tone open and calm. It has nothing to do with Mom and Dad, this is simply my own thought. I won't give up what rightfully belongs to me. James stared at her for a long time, as if seeing her for the first time. After a long moment, suppressing his impatience, he said in a deep voice, "Fine, I got it. You just stay here at home. I have to go back to the office building to process the housing allocation documents. We'll talk about this later." After saying that, he got up and turned to leave. His steps were rushed. He was obviously in a hurry to go back and manipulate the quota, afraid that a long delay would bring trouble. Watching his retreating back as he hurried away, Sarah's eyes turned thoroughly cold. She had completely figured out his entire conspiracy. Since coaxing her into stepping down had failed, he would inevitably make his move immediately, preparing to forge materials and tamper with the registration information. But he didn't know that she had already dismantled all of his backup plans in advance. Her in-laws were locked down on the military base by her, unable to spread rumors and smear her name. With all the proof of her financial support and her spotless, unassailable credentials as a military dependent in her hands, she had seen through all of his schemes ahead of time. She stood up and tightened her grip on the documents. The groundwork was sufficient, and the hidden dangers were clear. The next step was to set up defenses at every turn, fiercely guard her quota, and wait for him to walk right into her trap. In this game, she had already won the first mover advantage. After James left in a hurry, the sound of the door closing still lingered in her ears. Sarah stood where she was, without the slightest bit of panic. The conversation just now had confirmed all her suspicions. He was preparing to submit a false statement of family circumstances, attempting to strip her of her housing qualification. In her past life, he was able to successfully deceive everyone by relying on two things. First, her in-laws continuously spreading rumors of conflict outside, providing corroboration for his written materials. Second, the logistics department trusted him as a company commander and wouldn't excessively investigate a one-sided complaint from a family member. Now, she had completely cut off his first layer of reliance. Her in-laws were trapped in the camp's temporary dormitory, their every move under the military's watchful eyes, leaving them absolutely no opportunity to spread rumors around. But just this was far from enough. Once the written materials were submitted, if she couldn't produce equivalent evidence to refute them, she would still fall into a passive position. She couldn't just sit and wait for her doom. Sarah carefully put away the craft envelope containing her military-dependent files and the remittance receipts for the support payments. She locked it in a drawer of the wooden cabinet and tucked the key securely into her pocket. Then, she remembered that there was an Officer Johnson in the camp's logistics department who was responsible for the registration of housing allocation documents. He was known for being fair and always doing things according to the rules, never showing favoritism toward any military officer. Right now, there were still 2 hours until the final filing. She had to get there ahead of time and quietly leave a trail for the records. She straightened her clothes and slowly walked out of the family compound. Along the way, she ran into some familiar military wives and exchanged simple, customary greetings. Her expression was no different from usual, not letting anyone see the tense scheming in her heart. Upon arriving downstairs at the logistics office building, she didn't go straight upstairs to blindly complain to Officer Johnson. Making empty accusations against a fellow military officer was a major taboo in the military. If she didn't handle it with the right measure, it would be easy for her to be labeled as a troublemaker. Instead, she waited quietly by the flower bed downstairs. Before long, Officer Johnson came walking back from an errand. She quickly stepped forward, her tone humble and polite. "Officer Johnson, sorry to bother you for a moment." Officer Johnson stopped in his tracks, recognized her, and nodded with a smile. "Mrs. Smith, is there something you need?" "It's just a small matter regarding the military family housing allocation registration. I thought I'd come over to confirm if my documents are complete, so as not to delay the filing." Sarah took out the craft envelope and handed it over. "My military dependent registration certificate, the family evaluations from the past 3 years, and the return receipts are all here. Could you please help me verify them? If anything is missing, I can make it up in time." Officer Johnson didn't decline. He took the envelope and flipped through the documents one by one, carefully counting the pages. "All the materials are complete. Your years as an accompanying dependent meet the standard. All daily evaluation records are satisfactory, and there are no disciplinary records. You meet the basic requirements for this housing allocation." Officer Johnson returned the documents to her, casually adding, The quota registration will be sealed this evening. If anyone submits a statement of circumstances later to adjust the priority order, we will verify the testimonies from both sides. This was exactly the information Sarah wanted to hear. She opportunely revealed a perfectly measured look of confusion and spoke softly. To tell you the truth, James came home just now and urged me to voluntarily give up my quota this time. I am truly confused. We have honestly waited for 3 years, and all our conditions meet the standard. I really don't understand why I should voluntarily step down. Hearing this, Officer Johnson's brow furrowed slightly. The housing allocation follows a unified standard. Those who meet the conditions enjoy the corresponding qualifications. Voluntarily giving it up requires your own handwritten signature for confirmation. No one else has the right to apply on your behalf. Without your personal signature, any verbal claims are invalid. A weight was slightly lifted from Sarah's heart. The most crucial loophole in the rules had been figured out. If James wanted to revoke her quota, he couldn't bypass her handwritten signature. In her past life, he had played a dirty trick, forging her handwriting to submit the application to yield her rights. At that time, she was completely in the dark. It wasn't until the public announcement that she discovered everything was already a foregone conclusion. In this life, she would absolutely never let something similar happen again. She thanked him sincerely. "Thank you for the guidance, Officer Johnson. I know what to do now. I will not voluntarily give up the quota that belongs to me." Later, if someone brings in an unknown document to report an adjustment to my qualifications, please carefully verify the authenticity of the signature. Officer Johnson keenly caught the underlying meaning in her words and nodded solemnly. Rest assured, we will strictly follow the procedures and verify all written materials. Her goal achieved, Sarah said no more. She politely took her leave without dragging the conversation out, avoiding leaving an impression of being overly entangled. Leaving the office building, she deliberately took a detour to the temporary family dormitory, planning to check on the movements of the Smith elders one more time. Just as she reached the dormitory door, she heard an argument coming from inside. Martha's voice was kept very low, but it was still clear. "What's wrong with you? You couldn't convince her to voluntarily give up the quota? That girl is completely stubborn now and won't listen to reason. Is the excuse we originally came up with still going to work?" James's voice carried a suppressed irritability. "It's going to be difficult. Today's Sarah is completely different from before. She won't yield to the carrot or the stick. I plan to submit a statement of circumstances first, stating that there are constant conflicts in the family and that her temperament is stubborn and unreasonable, making her unsuitable for the housing allocation." Arthur's hesitant voice sounded. "Once the document is submitted, will the military send someone to investigate? We are trapped in the camp and can't go out to find anyone to speak on our behalf." "I'll do my best to maneuver around it," James replied. "As long as the materials are submitted and the priority order is adjusted first, once the quota is finalized and the house falls under Emily's name, everything will be set in stone." Standing outside the door, Sarah quietly listened to this entire conversation, a chill spreading over her layer by layer. The fact that he spoke Emily's name so casually was enough to prove that he had never intended to hide this selfish desire. In his eyes, her many years of sacrifice, her 3 years of suffering while accompanying the army, couldn't compare to a few words of weakness from his childhood sweetheart. Sarah didn't push the door open to confront them. It was too early for a showdown. It would only force him to speed up his actions and take desperate risks. She quietly turned and left, pretending she had never heard any of the conversation. Returning to her own small house, she began to ponder her next countermeasures. If he wanted to submit a written statement about family conflicts, he lacked witness support, making it unconvincing. But there was no guarantee he wouldn't drag in people from their hometown to fabricate gossip as supporting evidence. She had to find a clue directly linking to Emily, proving that the other woman had been coveting the housing allocation quota all along. She remembered that a few days ago, she had seen a note in James's jacket pocket. The handwriting was delicate, written by Emily. The content vaguely mentioned matters related to housing. At the time, she hadn't shown any reaction and didn't question him on the spot, silently committing the incident to memory. She opened the wooden cabinet where James usually kept his clothes and carefully searched through his jacket pockets. A moment later, a folded piece of stationery slipped from a work uniform pocket. The handwriting on the paper was gentle. It was exactly Emily's handwriting. "James, I heard that the camp is recently arranging housing allocations for dependents. I've always been without a fixed place to live. If there's a chance, I hope you can go out of your way for me. I know this puts you in a difficult position, but I truly have no one else to rely on." In just a few short sentences, every word was a demand deliberately wrapped in a display of weakness. Sarah carefully tucked the letter away. This was a piece of crucial material evidence, enough to prove that Emily actively knew about the housing allocation policy and proactively sought James's help, coveting the benefits that rightfully belonged to military dependents. The entire chain of evidence was gradually coming together. First, her complete military dependent qualification documents, proving she possessed the legal right to the housing allocation. Second, the remittance return receipts proving she had long fulfilled her financial support obligations, dispelling any claims of being unfilial. Third, Emily's handwritten letter verifying that she was actively seeking a housing quota. Fourth, Officer Johnson's verbal corroboration from logistics, clarifying that yielding a quota required her personal signature. Everything was ready. She only had to wait for the final moment of the public announcement. The sunlight on the horizon slowly sank. There were only 2 hours left until the list was sealed. Footsteps came from outside, and James returned once again. He looked slightly tense, holding a blank family circumstances declaration form in his hand. He pushed the door open and entered the room. His gaze fell on her as he forcefully suppressed the anxiety in his heart, trying his best to maintain a peaceful facade. "Sarah, let's have a good talk," he said. "If you stubbornly refuse to voluntarily give up the quota, it's inevitable that a rift will form between us as husband and wife in the future." She raised her eyes and looked at him, speaking calmly. "It's not that I stubbornly refuse to back down, it's that I have no reason to give up the qualification I earned through 3 years of hard work. If you have some difficulty in your heart, you might as well state it clearly. There's no need to beat around the bush." James paused. After hesitating for a moment, he pulled out another set of excuses. "Emily came to the city all by herself. She has no place to live and is in a difficult situation. We, as a couple, at least have this small house to stay in. Why don't we give the quota to her? Just consider it helping out someone from our hometown. I will definitely compensate you double in the future." Finally, he stopped hiding it and frankly stated the real reason. Sarah gently gripped the letter in her pocket, her tone peaceful. "If someone from our hometown is facing difficulties, there are corresponding relief channels for that. The military housing allocation has clear standards set, prioritizes military dependents who have met the required years of service. It's not meant to be casually used to help out fellow townsfolk. The rules are laid out right in front of us. Why should my rights be sacrificed to accommodate someone else?" Sarah asked. "How can you be so unreasonable?" James's brow furrowed tightly, his tone tinged with anger. "We're all folks from the same hometown. It's only right that we help each other out. Helping out has to have boundaries. You cannot use the house that rightfully belongs to me as a favor to someone else." Sarah slowly stood up. "James, I am going to ask you one last time. Are you planning to submit written materials falsely claiming that our family is full of conflicts to apply for the revocation of my housing quota?" James's pupils suddenly shrank. He obviously hadn't expected her to guess his plan. After a brief moment of panic, he forced himself to calm down and flatly denied it. "What kind of crazy ideas are you having? I am merely reporting our family situation to my superiors normally." "A normal report doesn't require fabricating lies," Sarah said unhurriedly. "The logistics department has already made it clear to me that giving up the quota requires my personal signature. I will absolutely not recognize any application for adjustment that lacks my signature. If someone were to forge my handwriting to submit materials, it would be a violation of military discipline." These words were like a clap of thunder, smashing ruthlessly into James's heart. The composure on his face completely shattered, and heavy unease surfaced in his eyes. He realized that she had already figured out all the rules, setting up defenses at every turn to make his pre-planned path impossible to walk. After a long moment of stalemate, James spoke in a cold, hard tone. "It seems that no matter what I say, you refuse to relent." "I am willing to discuss reasonable things," Sarah replied, "but I will absolutely never compromise on arrangements that damage my fundamental rights." James stopped trying to persuade her. He gripped the blank declaration form tightly in his hand, turned, and walked quickly away. Sarah could see clearly that he wouldn't just give up here. He still intended to put all his eggs in one basket and attempt to manipulate things within the final time frame. Sarah neatly organized all her evidence and kept it close to her body, quietly waiting for the moment of the evening's public announcement to arrive. All the conspiracies in the dark had been clearly exposed, and all the defensive lines she had laid down were in place. The moment the list was posted would be the time for a complete reckoning. The setting sun dyed the roads of the military camp a pale orange. Around the housing allocation announcement board, quite a few dependents and soldiers slowly gathered. Everyone was waiting for the final list to be posted. Sarah securely tucked all her evidence into her canvas bag and walked slowly toward the announcement area. There was no restlessness in her heart, only a calmness as if the dust had already settled. James, Martha, and Arthur were already standing on one side of the crowd. Emily was also standing quietly to the side. Wearing a plain-colored blouse and with her eyes cast down, she put on a weak and timid appearance. The moment Martha saw Sarah, she immediately tugged at James's sleeve and muttered a few words in a lowered voice, her eyes hiding undisguised wariness. Noticing Sarah's gaze, Emily nodded slightly, wearing a polite yet distant, faint smile on her face. James stepped forward and blocked Sarah's path, deliberately shielding her from the gazes of others. He kept his voice extremely low. "Sarah, at this point, if you are willing to step down, everything can still be discussed properly. Don't make a scene that gets out of hand." Sarah looked back at him calmly. "I've already given you plenty of opportunities to discuss this properly before. You're the one who has always intended to use underhanded methods to steal the quota that belongs to me. So how can you say I'm making a scene? Do you have to cling to this one house and not let go? Airing our dirty laundry as husband and wife and letting outsiders watch it as a joke? What good does that do you?" James frowned deeply, his tone carrying a final bit of coercion. "If a written statement about family conflicts is submitted to the superiors, even if the quota cannot be swapped in the end, your reputation will be damaged." "A good reputation is never earned through blind forbearance," Sarah replied, her tone steady. "I have dutifully accompanied the army for 3 years, strictly keeping to my duty without a single mistake. I have no need to fear anyone's fabricated gossip." Just then, several officers from the logistics department walked over, holding the printed lists, and orderly posted them on the public announcement board. The crowd instantly surged forward, craning their necks to look. Sarah stepped forward, her gaze immediately locking onto the quota column near the top. In the spot for the first-in-line military-dependent quota, the name filled in was shockingly not hers, but Emily's. Low murmurs of discussion rose all around. Many military wives who knew Sarah showed surprise on their faces. She had been with the army for 3 years, and everyone knew her qualifications. No one could have imagined that the quota would fall to Emily, who had just arrived in the city and had no military-dependent registration on file. Joy instantly blossomed on Martha's face as she secretly exchanged a glance with Arthur. Emily clutched the hem of her shirt, a trace of imperceptible delight flashing through her eyes, while still maintaining her docile posture. James breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at Sarah, his tone carrying a hint of condescending consolation. "Sarah, look, the list is finalized. What's done is done. Rather than continuing to cause trouble, it's better to accept reality. I'll figure out other ways to compensate you later." "What's done is done?" Sarah gently curled her lips into a smile. In front of the military emblem, forged documents do not make a foregone conclusion. As soon as her words fell, she stepped in front of Officer Johnson, who was in charge of the announcement. Her voice was clear and bright, loud enough for many people around to hear clearly, yet she remained restrained and polite. "Officer Johnson, please wait a moment. There is a problem with this announcement list. I have an objection." Everyone's gaze instantly converged on her. James's face drastically changed. He quickly stepped forward. "Sarah, stop making a scene. The list has been uniformly reviewed by logistics. How can you question it so casually?" "Whether I am making a scene or not can be determined simply by presenting the evidence," Sarah replied. She ignored him, unzipped her canvas bag, and took out a stack of paper documents one by one. "The first is my military-dependent file, and the continuous 3-year annual dependent evaluation records." The files proved in black and white that she had been with the Army for 3 full years and 2 months, meeting the primary conditions for this housing allocation. Officer Johnson immediately took the materials and flipped through them, his expression slowly growing serious. Sarah continued, taking out a stack of postal remittance return receipts and spreading them out flat. "The second is the return receipts for the living expenses I sent to my parents-in-law every month over the past 3 years. This is enough to prove that I have long fulfilled my financial support obligations. There is no such thing as being harsh to my elders or causing trouble due to being unfilial. Previously, someone submitted materials to the superiors, falsely claiming that the conflict between my in-laws and me had been continuously escalating. This is completely inconsistent with the facts." Martha's face turned pale. She subconsciously wanted to open her mouth to argue, but Sarah cut her off before she could speak. "Mom and Dad have been living in the military's temporary dormitory recently. Many people in the camp can testify to this. We have not had any conflicts during this time, so the claims of fabricated conflicts collapse on their own." Following that, Sarah took out the letter written in Emily's own handwriting and handed it forward. The third piece of evidence, a handwritten letter from Emily to James. In the letter, she proactively mentions knowing about the housing allocation and asks for favors regarding housing. Emily has not processed any military-dependent paperwork. According to the regulations of this housing allocation, she does not possess the qualifications to apply. Officer Johnson picked up the letter and carefully examined the handwriting, then turned to look at Emily, who was looking panicked on the sidelines. James's entire body tensed up. He hurriedly spoke up to defend himself. "This is just an ordinary plea for help between fellow townsfolk. I did not abuse my power for personal gain." The adjustment of the materials was a conclusion drawn after comprehensively considering family difficulties. Comprehensive consideration? Sarah turned to look at him, her words clear and precise. "Adjusting the quota requires the person involved to voluntarily submit a signed waiver document. I have never signed any application to voluntarily give up my quota. I wonder where the signature came from on the adjustment application the military received." Hearing this, Officer Johnson immediately reacted. He turned and instructed a colleague next to him, "Immediately retrieve all the written materials submitted for this quota adjustment and verify the handwriting on the signature." The murmurs of discussion around them grew increasingly heated. The observing soldiers and military wives gradually saw through the scheme, and the way they looked at James began to change. The military tabooed favoritism and fraud the most. Using the convenience of one's position to misappropriate the benefits of military dependence was crossing a disciplinary red line. Emily could no longer maintain her weak and fragile facade. Her face deathly pale, she defended herself in a low voice. "I just casually asked for help. I never thought things would turn out like this. I have no idea how the quota was changed." Seeing that the situation was going south, Martha tried to bring out the filial piety card again to play the victim. "We're all family here. Why make a scene in front of the leaders? Can't we all just take a step back? When you were plotting to swap the quota, no one thought about taking a step back." Sarah responded calmly. "I waited dutifully for 3 years to earn this qualification. Why should I voluntarily back down?" Before long, the logistics officer hurried back with the submitted application form and reported loudly, "Officer Johnson, the handwriting on this application for Sarah to voluntarily give up her quota clearly does not match the sample kept in her file. There is suspicion of forgery." With the ironclad proof laid out before him, all the disguises on James's face completely collapsed. His body swayed slightly. He could no longer argue. Officer Johnson looked at James with a solemn expression. "Company Commander James, this matter is of a serious nature. Please come with us to the office immediately to explain the whole situation and await investigation and handling by the superiors. The public announcement list is temporarily revoked and suspended from taking effect." 2 on-duty soldiers stepped forward to escort James to the office building for questioning. Martha panicked and tried to chase after him but was stopped by the officers. Arthur hung his head without saying a word. The compromising and peacemaking tactics he usually relied on were completely useless now. Emily stood in the middle of the crowd, bearing the gazes cast at her from all directions. At a loss for what to do, she silently lowered her head and left the announcement area. The commotion gradually dissipated, and the crowd of onlookers left one after another. Officer Johnson handed the materials back to Sarah, his tone earnest. "Mrs. Smith, your evidence is sufficient. We will conduct an investigation strictly in accordance with military discipline and handle this housing allocation dispute fairly. We will not allow the rights and interests of compliant family members to be infringed upon. We will notify you of the final results immediately. Thank you all for handling this impartially." Sarah nodded in gratitude, putting away all the documents and walking out of the announcement area. The evening glow on the horizon gradually faded. Sarah did not return to her small house immediately, but strolled slowly along the camp roads. The grievances and pain accumulated over many years from her past life did not surge violently. All that remained was a sense of relaxation, as if the dust had finally settled. She no longer had to constantly compromise to maintain a so-called harmonious family like before. She no longer had to endure endless demands and betrayal. Within 2 days, the investigation results were officially issued. For suspected forgery of documents and using the convenience of his position to illegally adjust the housing allocation quota, James received a circulated note of criticism, was stripped of all qualifications for performance evaluations and promotions for the year, and was ordered to write a profound self-criticism. The forged waiver application was invalidated, and the temporarily drafted list was completely revoked. A new housing announcement was posted again, and Sarah's name was securely marked on the list of compliant quotas. When her parents-in-law clearly learned of the handling results, unable to influence the housing allocation matter any longer, and afraid that staying at the military base would stir up more trouble, Martha and Arthur took the initiative to propose returning to their rural hometown. They never dared to casually show up at her door, demanding money again. Adhering to the basic baseline of her support obligations, Sarah agreed to provide them with reasonable subsidies during holidays and festivals, establishing clear boundaries and refusing to entertain their bottomless demands anymore. Knowing she was entirely in the wrong, Emily left town shortly after, never coming back to the military camp to pester them again. On the day she received the keys to the house, Sarah pushed open the wooden door of the brand new family apartment. The inside was clean and bright. Her very own secure and stable home was finally held firmly in her own hands. With their marriage having reached this point, the cracks were already beyond repair. She calmly drafted a divorce application. Once all the paperwork and procedures were finalized, she would completely walk away from this relationship filled with schemes and calculations. She would live a stable life relying on her own craftsmanship, no longer needing to depend on anyone, nor ever having to suffer grievances just to please someone else. Reborn back into 1989, the intense battle on the day of the housing allocation had finally come to a close, and the dust had completely settled.
What a satisfying ending. It proves that kindness without boundaries just makes you a target. Her secret? No arguing, just staying calm, knowing the rules, and keeping receipts. Sometimes, walking away is the ultimate power move. What did you think of her strategy? Drop a comment, like, and subscribe.